All right, all right. We are live, season 2, episode 11. I have Mr. Thomas Sargent with me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you, Angela?
Listen, I'm good. We're hanging in there, huh?
Yes, we are doing our best.
Doing our best. That's the most we can do is our best. I'm so excited about this conversation. As I've previously said, July is Minority Mental Health Month, and
Mhm.
the title of this episode is Mend Our Health, because I really think that a lot of us don't realize how trauma and the trauma that we experience and that we
Mhm.
see, how it affects our mental health. So I believe that
Right.
we need to be aware of those things, but also mending our hearts and mending what we've been seeing and taking in, because it's been a lot. It's been a
It's
lot.
been a whole lot.
It's been a lot. So before we jump into the conversation, why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Well, my name is Thomas Sargent. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner here in Dallas, Texas. I've been in psychiatry specifically for the last 4 years, but my background is in emergency department nursing, where you still see mental health issues all the time. So just life has brought me to this point. And right now I'm working at one of the county hospitals in the Dallas area. And I get to see a lot of minorities. The minorities are the majority of the population we see at my hospital.
Yeah, that's good. The minority is the majority. And
Mhm.
I think that's very true and very well put. One of the most important things to me about having this conversation is to remove this stigma of
Mhm.
the fact that minorities do deal with mental health issues. I don't
For
know
sure.
who has placed this in our minds and in our belief systems that we're okay and because we're
Right.
strong people and we can just pray things away. I think that I
Mhm.
want to diminish those thoughts, right?
Right.
And so again, in a lot of cases, mental health is attributed to our trauma, and the rate of
Mhm.
Black Americans showing clinically significant signs of anxiety or depressive disorders jumped from 36% to 41% after the viewing of the George Floyd video.
Right.
That says a lot in and of itself.
It does. It does. And I think that goes to show you that, as Black people, we both have intergenerational trauma from slavery and from segregation, civil rights movement, and we're still experiencing somewhat not only direct but indirect trauma. We see
Mm,
our brothers and sisters being killed brutally and mistreated by a force that's supposed to protect us. And so it leaves a lot of us feeling hopeless and helpless,
helpless.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I was telling my friend, I was like, sometimes I've had to remove myself from social
Mm,
media because I literally was so heavy. Like I
mm,
was just emotional and just
right.
crying. And one day I literally couldn't get out of bed because my
Mm,
joints were hurting so bad. And I told her, I said, I don't think we understand, like you said, even if it's indirect, because
mm,
we've been through so much already and we've
mm,
experienced, had our own personal experiences with racism.
right. Mm,
It almost is like a rerun or a replay. It takes you back to certain things you've experienced. My mind went back to a child and I was like, why in 2020 are we still fighting for this?
mm,
And I told her it's almost like when you get into an accident, it's like, when you talk about trauma, you get into an accident and maybe the day of you don't feel anything, but then the next
mm,
day you wake up and you have
right.
pain and you're stiff, and then the next day you're like, well, maybe I need to go to rehab. And it's like every
Right.
day, you
Yeah.
find yourself being more sore. And I feel like that's what we've been dealing with because it's been
Hmm.
one thing after another. And then you add to that this whole pandemic situation,
I
which is
mean,
crazy, right? Never seen
right.
anything like it. And,
Mm-mm.
and so it's like you said, what do we do with all of that? So we're going to talk about that, about some coping
Hmm.
skills, and we're going to get
Right.
down into it. But I want to get into some points before we jump into that I saw you post on your social media page about a few days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hit these 4 points. The first one is depression among Black youth is 30% higher. This was crazy to me. 30% higher than average for their
Hmm.
age group. Black youth
Hmm.
are babies. And
Right.
hit me hard, right? Because I've never shared this before on the podcast. Some people know it personally, but I've never shared this. But if this is going to be a safe place for others, it has to be a safe place for me as well. My daughter was diagnosed with depressive. I forgot what they call it. It just left me, but basically depression, and had a suicide attempt last year. And I remember so many people around us were like, "That's some white girl stuff. What is what is that?"
Right.
They really couldn't grasp the fact that a
Mhm.
12-year-old was dealing with depression and
Right.
didn't know how to deal with it. And so when I
Mhm.
saw that, like, I knew, even her just going through the process of that healing and getting her help, and I saw all of these other kids, I knew, but my daughter was like the only black girl. But I
Mhm.
think it's important to know that it's 30% higher for our youth as well.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure you see that.
Right. And I think it goes to, what our youth are dealing with that we
Yeah,
really didn't deal with. Social media
correct.
has a lot to do with that. Comparing our kids are comparing themselves to, peers through social media, and it's somewhat unhealthy. And there's a bullying aspect in that too, where social media can be a really cruel place. And so I think that's where a lot of our teenagers are living. They're not living,
Yeah,
in real life,
reality.
for
Yeah,
lack of a better word. They're living, through social media. But also, I think that has something to do with racial disparities.
mm,
People who are affected economically, health wise, education, all those are consequences of America's racist history
yeah,
and the devaluing of life
yeah.
in all aspects for Black people. And so that's showing up in our children,
Right.
unfortunately. And hopefully, as time goes on, and we, as the Black community, the minority community, as we grow, we will show our kids that talking about your emotions is okay,
Yeah,
because that's where a lot of people, to be blatant and kind of open, that's where a lot of people die, is in silence. And
for
especially our Black community, because they're afraid to talk about it, because we weren't, unfortunately raised that
sure.
way. You keep
You keep it
whatever's going on, you
in this
keep it
house,
in.
stay in this house.
Hmm.
That's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. And I
Hmm.
don't think we realized it. And then, like you said, we pass it on to our children. And
Right.
then you add to that like you said, just the way social media and
Hmm.
society tries to make our skin somewhat something that is not
Hmm.
beautiful. So you
Right.
add that to that. So you're battling so many things, like you said, that we didn't even think about. We were just
Right.
being kids and having fun and outside playing, and they have so many battles to fight.
Society is forcing them to grow up so fast. They're worrying about things that are way beyond their
Yeah,
years. And
yeah,
so the thought that you need to have X, Y, and Z in place before you move to this, the next level or
yeah,
what have you, that's causing a lot of stress on our youth.
yeah.
So we have to kind of let them be children.
Yeah, and be open to hearing what they have
Right.
to say. Because a
Oh,
lot of
for
times
sure.
as parents, we don't want to hear some stuff because it's a lot.
Hmm.
Okay. When my daughter came to me, I was like, ooh, wait a minute, hold on, baby. What happened to my little? But we have to be open, because the
Hmm.
moment they feel that it's not a safe space, they're gonna shut down.
Oh,
So
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I
okay.
always say we have to help them unpack this baggage
That's
that
good.
we placed in their
Yeah.
possession anyway.
Yeah. And we're still
Um,
learning that too. Like we're
hmm.
still learning how to unpack our own stuff. So it's like
Oh,
it's a
yeah,
whole thing, but it's
yeah,
necessary. It's
true.
necessary. Okay, so the next one I saw was a person of color is more likely to be incarcerated than their mental health condition identified. And that hit me really hard, because
Hmm.
we've seen that in the last few years. A lot of the police shootings, Somebody had a mental health crisis. The police were called to assist and to help, and somehow the person ended up dead, either in police custody or upon arriving to the crisis.
Yeah. And I think it's funny how police can be so patient
Yes.
with mental illness of another color, but if it's anywhere near brown, the threat, it seems like it's multiplied.
Yeah.
And studies show that mentally ill people aren't even at an increased rate to commit these mass murders or things of that nature. But I think police need to be educated. I think
For sure.
police need to be informed about mental health conditions, how to de-escalate. I think that's a major part of the police force that they're lacking, is the ability to de-escalate. That's something we do in the hospital every day with people with psychiatric illnesses. We use the least resistant way to help them calm down and help them, stay safe. And so I think that the patience of police officers is lost on, Black and brown people, unfortunately. And that's due to years and years of stereotypes that we're a threat, that we're dangerous, that we're wild and out of control.
Yeah.
And so these are things that are in the back of their minds and make them feel like we're, gonna take their lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Whew, yeah. So the last point, stigma is one of the main reasons why people with mental health issues don't seek treatment or take their medication. This is what got me. They don't want to be viewed as having another deficit in a racially conscious society. Listen, that'll preach out by itself, okay? Because I've never thought about that.
Me either. The fact that we don't want to add something to the already pile of deficits that we have, but the deficits that society has placed on us, not necessarily that we have them, but that society has made it seem like we have. And so I think it is, in a lot of people's minds, one less thing I have to accept about myself, or one less thing I have to battle about myself. And so I think that's what keeps a lot of people from just opening up and seeking help. It's scary.
Yeah.
Scary.
It's like if they're already counting me out because of my skin color, and then they're already counting me out because it's, for instance, I'm a woman, and then they're already counting, and it's like you just keep adding things from where I come from, the area that I live in, or I'm not educated or whatever. And then you add, I get it, but I've never thought of that. And I think it's really sad because people should be able to, seek out help when needed. Because when you don't seek out help, it's like you said earlier, that's one of the causes of people not being able to get through, because they didn't have an outlet, they didn't have anyone to speak to. So that is the saddest thing to me, that we don't want to say anything because we don't want anything else counting against us.
Right.
Wow. So while we're kind of there, you and I kind of spoke while we were prepping for this episode. And one of the things we talked about, and we're kind of in that lane, is the lack of trust between Blacks and healthcare professionals, and just overall, because we see it in our communities with police officers, and also in the medical profession, just based on, like you said, we've already said, our past and things that have been done to us against our will, or things that have, we went in for one thing and came out and something else was used for, we already know that. So our past have a lot to do with this tension that's been created, and this gap. How would you say maybe that we can bridge the gap and regain trust to get the help that we need, if possible? How can we go about doing that?
I think one thing is not being afraid to advocate for yourself. One famous person, Serena, she kept advocating for herself and advocating for herself during childbirth. And, her fear ended up being true.
Yeah.
And so not letting, healthcare professionals even ones of your own race, not
Yeah.
letting them dismiss
Mhm.
your concern and your complaints. But also, we need more culturally competent providers in the medical field.
Very
We
true.
need more healthcare professionals that look like us. There have been multiple studies in the past that have shown uh, health outcomes have improved greatly when the healthcare provider was um, a person of their own ethnicity. So I think the more and more Black and Brown people that get into healthcare, the less likely people are to use trust as a reason not to seek healthcare.
Mm.
So I think we are often distrustful because of issues like the syphilis experiment in
Yeah.
Tuskegee, or we thought we were getting,
Right.
treatment, but we weren't. We were just guinea pigs for the progression of syphilis.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, they already knew what they needed to know about it, and so it's just things like that, and things instances like that have replayed over and over in history, and it's embedded in our brain. So
Even with
until
COVID-19, though, you know what I'm
true,
saying? Like how Blacks are disproportionately affected. And then even I was watching a video last night with Bill Gates, and I forgot the lady's name, but she was talking about the vaccine and how, oh, it needs to go out to Blacks first. It needs to go out to the one. We don't want to be no guinea pigs. You know
right,
what I'm saying?
right,
But it's like, do you hear yourself? You know what I'm
hmm
saying? Like it's something to that. And I don't
right,
think people realize that. But why is it that we just need it so badly? Yes, we've been affected, but why don't
hmm
y'all test it on yourselves first and then let us know
hmm
how it works out for you? Because I
right,
just don't trust it. I think there's an agenda. And it's like,
hmm
it's crazy how I think people think you can pull the wool over our eyes. Like at this point,
hmm
I think that's the beauty of all of these things that have happened in the last few weeks is that we're now, like you said, we're advocating for ourselves and we're standing
hmm
up for ourselves and saying, no, not this time. Enough is enough.
right,
So that's really good.
yeah.
Advocate for ourselves. Um, so I want to get into, I guess, so say someone says, okay, I'm going to go get me some help. I need to speak with somebody. Um, I've seen a lot of doctors, like you said, because I live in Collin County. So the number of my people as far as doctors are few and far between because I've searched because I've had issues with doctors just dismissing symptoms. I've had traumatic pregnancies. Both of my first one was an emergency C-section. They didn't listen. I had been saying for months something wasn't right. And of course, they waited to the last minute and something wasn't. And then my last one was a miscarriage. And I had been saying something isn't right. So I've been searching high and low and I will post some resources, but it's hard to find
Right.
sometimes those. Say someone says, I'm going to go anyway, and I'm going to find the person closest to me. They have good reviews, whatever. A lot of times I've seen where the quick fix is medicine. That's
hmm
always, let's write a prescription, you take this. And a lot of times the medicine is worse than the side effects of the medicine is worse than maybe what they were experiencing to begin with. So talk a
Right.
little bit about that because I think that you deal with medicine versus support therapy and how
hmm
that can be more beneficial so that people can be educated when they do go to their doctors to advocate for themselves, to have other options.
Right. Right. So when I assess a patient, I assess the symptoms, but I also assess why they're having those symptoms.
Yeah.
So if, there are a lot of psychosocial stressors that are contributing to your depression, to your anxiety, then I'm often led to suggest therapy as your first line of treatment. Because, like you said, with medicines, first of all, we don't know if it's going to work or not. Second of all, you may have side effects to it. And so, to lessen those risks, we I often suggest therapy, learning to cope with things as they come. Because what I tell people often is, even if you're on medicine, that's not going to stop life from happening. And
True.
so if you aren't able to deal with the twists and turns of life um, without shutting down, without getting into that dark place,
Mhm.
then we need to focus on therapy more. Medicine works on certain chemicals in your mind, and to be honest and to be open, we really still don't know exactly how some of these medicines work. We just know in a lot of cases, if in the clinical trials, that they do work. And I've seen people's lives be changed with medicine, but I've seen a lot more people change their lives with therapy. And so that's what I always tell people. And to be in my office, I like to think of the patient as a partner in their treatment. And so I always give them the risks, alternatives, and benefits of every treatment I suggest or I bring up. And I let them make the final choice.
That's good.
I give them the facts, and based on what they know about themselves, what they know about their capabilities and their lives, and the likelihood of them following through with the treatment plan, they'll choose the best decision for them. Now, I do get some people who are like, no, I just want the medicine.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, I again reiterate that the medicine, first of all, isn't a quick fix. People think it's a quick fix.
They do.
People think it's quicker than therapy. But sometimes you can hear something in therapy that clicks
Listen.
right then, and you're able
Yeah.
to use it for the rest of your
Yeah.
life. But with medicine, especially our antidepressants, it can take 6 to 8 weeks to get to a steady state in your system, and even longer sometimes to show benefit.
That's good. So we flowing here because that's the next point is coping skills. You mentioned therapy, and I agree with you. I started therapy 3 months ago, and it has been such like the best decision I could have made. And I was leery because I was like, well, I don't really know, but having the option to just speak to somebody about what you're dealing with and just have that outlet instead of holding everything in, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so powerful and it's so healing and helpful. So that's one of those things that I think that I really want to stress, especially to our minorities, is that going to therapy doesn't make you crazy. It isn't something that that's creepy. Like now, they have it virtually where you can be in your own home, at the comfort of your home. And I would suggest it. Just at least try it. There's so many benefits right now, even with apps. They have apps where you can just log on and just talk to someone. So I really want to stress that, and I hope people use that during this time because, like we said earlier, there's so much going on. You need a safe space. And I remember, like, I used to call my friends all the time, like, girl, let me tell you what's going on. Okay? And it's like everybody has their own stuff now. People are like, everybody's dealing. So it helps to have like someone outside of your circle, an unbiased person, just to listen. And that's what they mostly do. Like they don't necessarily just, you need to do this and do this. They listen.
Yeah.
And just allow you to.
And I think what people think, I think I agree with you. I think people think that you go in there, you tell them your problems, and they say, do this, do that, do that. And it's not that. It's helping you, like we said earlier, helping you unpack what you're feeling, help you change behavior if you're reacting badly to those feelings. And so it's just a process of kind of reflection. It's a mirror. It's
Very
a mirror.
Very true. And speaking of reflection, I'm going to put this little point in here. And I think it's very important. I'm not saying you have to do this, and you can let me know if you agree, disagree. I stand to be corrected if so. If you are a African American woman, I feel like you should try to find an African American woman that is your counselor or therapist. And male, whoever you are, I feel like, because when I did therapy like 5 or 6 years ago, it wasn't beneficial. And the main reason I think that it wasn't, because the lady was a Caucasian woman in like maybe her 60s or 70s. So when I would tell her things or tell her about how I grew up, she was like, oh my gosh, you poor soul. And it's like, girl, everybody I know grew up like that. What are you talking? But she couldn't relate.
Right.
It was to her, oh my gosh, it was like, this is just this, that's child abuse. And I'm like, okay, this is not gonna work. I think I went to 3 sessions and I was like, eh. And it totally turned me off to therapy altogether. But I wanted to bring up that point because you want someone who can be relatable and understand your culture and
Right.
understand how we grew up and how we talk and how, our lingo, all of that. Because I would say things, she'd be like, I'm sorry, what does that mean? You want
Right.
someone that can understand and be on your level, so to speak.
Right. Right. I agree. I think it makes the rapport building easier. Um, and because of that, you're more likely to bring stuff up, or you're more likely to kind of divulge information you wouldn't normally do if
Yeah.
you were talking to somebody who was not of your ethnicity. But to kind of be devil's advocate, some white people, they surprise you, because my wife
Yeah.
has a therapist, and
Mhm.
she, the first time they met
Mhm.
was during the pandemic and during the civil unrest and all this stuff. So one of the first questions she asked her was, "How are you dealing with the
That's good.
increase in racism that we're seeing?" And I know, she was like, "I know it's been going on for years, but now it's in your face, and you can't get away from it, so to speak. So how are you dealing with that?" And I thought that was an interesting question to
Yeah.
ask, because you would expect most white people to try to ignore it, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
try not to bring it up.
For real.
So I agree. I'm looking
Well,
for a
I guess,
black therapist.
yeah, I'm cool. I'll say this. Do what works for you. I
True.
just, I really do what works. I've done both. I've done both. I
Mm-hmm.
had a male Caucasian at one point. It's like family therapy. And then
Mm-hmm.
I've done it all.
Right.
I just have found this to be the longest time I've stayed
Mm-hmm.
in because it's like, we here. So she gets
And
me.
that's
But
yeah, that's therapy. Period.
yeah.
You want
So
to
whoever it is,
find the person that
just make
works for
sure they
you.
here.
Hmm.
Because you don't want to, it's just important. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not
Hmm.
going to go any
For
deeper.
sure.
So I
For
love
sure.
that. I love the other point of view. So yeah, do what works for you. But what are some other coping skills? So we talked about therapy, but I'm
Hmm.
sure there, because you hear about self-care. We hear that a lot. I think that
Oh
word is
yeah.
so, oh my gosh. I'm almost sick of the word, right? Because
Yeah.
we say it and everybody has their own, well, most of the time it's like you see the spas and the facials and the
Mhm.
self-care is so much deeper than that.
It is. It
Um,
is.
what would you say though, as far as self-care or coping skills that people can use?
Right. I often like to say that self-care is not selfish. So people, like you said, when people think of self-care, they think of, oh, going to the spa by yourself, going on a bike ride by yourself, being kind of self-absorbed, just focusing on you. But self-care is really activity that you can do so you can be your best self for other people in your life. Um, and I think the part of self care that a lot of people don't talk about is setting boundaries. Setting boundaries with people around you. We all have that person that kind of tests the limits, and we just have to set those boundaries with people. No, I'm not available. I'm off work, but I'm not available to do X, Y, and Z.
Listen.
Um, and so I think setting boundaries with people who often take advantage, or
Mhm.
you feel like they're taking advantage of you.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries with things, or setting limits on things that leave you drained.
Hmm.
Like, we talked about social media.
Yeah.
I've set a limit on how much time I spend on social
Hmm.
media, because, scrolling, and I'm glad the awareness is there, but scrolling through
Seeing.
police brutality, racist white people, pandemic, COVID's never going away, that that is, draining and exhausting. And so I set limits on that type of thing. And some of my favorite things to do for self-care, watching movies that are lighthearted
Yeah.
and funny, listening to music, dancing with my wife. That's one thing we like to do as much as possible. Is just turn on music, turn the TV off,
Mhm.
get our phones out of the way, sometimes she likes to kind of set it up and record it so she can post it later. But yeah,
How
we
we
like
do.
to dance. Yeah. So
That's sweet.
those are things, and I don't want people to think of self-care as a chore. So if you feel like, oh, I got to do that self-care thing again, like exercise. A lot of people want to say exercise is self-care, and it can be for some people. If you feel great afterwards, yeah, go for it. But for a lot of people, they feel like, oh man, and if it's weighing you down like that before you do it,
Ain't it?
then it's probably not for you.
That ain't
That's not your self-care.
it.
You got to find something
I know it's not for me, so
else.
but that's good. I always say self-care is just caring for yourself. Like you said,
Mhm,
what do you like? We make it really hard, but it's not.
mhm,
Whatever it is that you enjoy. I know for me, I don't necessarily like journaling because I'm never consistent. But if I see something on social media, I follow different therapists, and usually we save all these memes in our phones and screenshot them.
mhm.
I write them down,
Yeah.
and so I can refer to it and just
Oh,
tips
that's
and
good.
coping skills and things that I see throughout the day. At night, I write them down and I meditate on those things,
Mhm.
and work at those things. And for me, that's self care because I want to be a better me.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's a part of my self care. And like you said, I love music, so I'll turn it up and like be dancing around the house. My daughter's like, "Mom, really, you too old for that?" But that's what makes me feel good. And just doing nothing. Okay,
Mhm.
like I work so much, I do so much that just doing nothing, that's self
Yeah.
care.
I'm
Finding
telling
time
you.
just to be, just to breathe, just to have a moment.
Right.
So yeah, I like
Yeah.
it. I like it. So that's good. So we're going to conclude with this because we've had a great conversation so far. This has been really good, and I believe it's going to help somebody. But the reason why we're talking about this again is because I want people to get help when needed, and I don't want to lose anyone else or see anybody else go through the things that I've incurred as a mother, as a family member. It's a lot, and I want people to also know that the effects of not getting help aren't just suicide attempts or
Right.
erratic behavior. Sometimes we spoke about this, it's also medical. So we see the hypertension and we see the different things in our communities. So I want people to know that there are other things that are affected by us not getting help. So if you would just talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah. So, the body and the mind are very connected. And so my role right now is in the console liaison service for psychiatry. And so we are often consulted by medical teams that are taking care of a patient for various reasons. They're having surgery, they, broke their foot, had a heart attack, and the medical teams notice symptoms that are kind of out of proportion to what they would normally expect, and so they ask us to come in and assess for any psychiatric or mental distress. And I tell you, a lot of times that is the case. People with abdominal pain, that just seems to flare up out of nowhere. That's what they say.
Yeah.
But really, when you dig deep, is you just got off the phone with so and so, and they're having a hard time, and you kind of internalize their issues, or financial strain. And so, a lot of our anxiety and mood symptoms, they kind of live in our gut. They present as nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. People who get really anxious, they have dizziness, um, increased heart rate. Sometimes even panic attacks can feel like heart attacks sometimes. And so when you don't relieve that stress in a healthy way, it definitely weighs on your body. It leads to hypertension. It leads to all these other medical issues. Diabetes has been linked to, mental distress because you aren't eating right.
Yeah.
And so you're eating all these unhealthy foods that, increase weight, and, it leads to diabetes. So these are all things that we see on a daily basis. So we definitely have to take care of our mental because it will definitely start to show in our physical in one way or another. And by then, it may be too late for, that organ that was
Yeah.
affected. Or, so we just have to, like you said, we have to be ready to take care of ourselves in all aspects holistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key.
That's good. I always say what you don't deal with, it will deal with you. And I've had
Hmm.
all of those. I've had neurological issues that doctors couldn't pinpoint. But
Hmm.
they didn't know I was in, a traumatic relationship. And
Right,
I didn't even get that, it was
right.
attributed to that. I just knew, I mean, I literally woke up one morning and couldn't speak. I couldn't like
Hmm.
do normal things, picking up things and walking. And I had to have people take care of me. And I was like 22, like
Hmm.
craziness. Like,
Yeah.
but it was just everything had been mounting, 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 and boom. And it took a long time to recover from that. And I still have certain issues. I can feel it. Like, okay,
Hmm.
this you've been
Right,
okay, it's some stress somewhere. I deal with it internally. I can be
right.
smiling and okay, but I'm like something, I can feel it. I know my body will let me know. So pay attention to your body. It's always speaking. You just have to be
Hmm.
willing to listen. Oh,
For
this was
sure.
so good.
Yay.
I've enjoyed
Thank
this
you for
conversation.
having me.
No problem. Thank you for joining me. Let the people know where they can find you on social media, and if you have anything coming up, let them know.
So my Instagram is Salute the Sarge. And on Facebook, I am Thomas C. Sargent. I'm not really heavy on Twitter just yet, but one of these days I'll head that way maybe.
Awesome, awesome. So go check him out. Like he's so y'all heard the knowledge he was spitting tonight. So go check him out. Be sure to stay tuned to all upcoming episodes. Again, we're talking about mental health all month long. We got back to back to back episodes, 3 episodes this month. So I'm so excited to have those conversations. So until next time, you're listening to and watching the Ever Evolving Podcast.